When I joined the Mormon Church, no one told me that African Americans had once been considered cursed or that the color of their skin was regarded as a mark of divine disfavor. I was baptized into a spiritual community, or so I thought, without any indication of the deeply racist doctrines that had shaped that institution for generations. In those early days, the focus was on warmth, inclusion, community, and personal revelation. But as the years passed, the deeper truths started to surface, truths that had been hidden from me at first, presumably because I might not have accepted them if I had known them on day one. After a few years in the church and after attending 4 temple ceremonies, I learned about the priesthood ban that had denied African American men the ability to hold the priesthood for over a century. Only then was I told the reason, or at least the reason as it was explained within the doctrines of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I was told about a curse, about ancient disobedience, about lineage, and about skin color as a sign of spiritual imperfection. The deeper I got involved with the church, the more these explanations began to emerge, not as transparent truths told to converts, but as layered, gradual revelations justified with spiritual rationalizations that conveniently kept the more disturbing parts of church history out of reach until one was already emotionally and spiritually invested. I remember very clearly how, in Latin America, I heard people within the church tell me that the actions of the President of the United States were inspired by God. And not just in general terms, these were members of the church who believed divine will was expressed through political decisions and who held racist doctrines as spiritual truths. I was told about the curse upon black people as if it were a given, as if it were a foundational truth that simply hadn't been explained to me yet. And then came one of the most revealing and disturbing moments. I was told indirectly that black people, upon being resurrected, would no longer be black. That idea by itself might sound bizarre to someone unfamiliar with the church's history. But within the context of Mormon theology, it was framed as a sign of spiritual perfection. In this narrative, when you are resurrected, you are perfected. And if perfection involves being white-skinned instead of black, then the implication is inescapable: blackness is considered an imperfection. No one had to say it explicitly because the structure of the belief itself said it for them. To claim that a black person becomes white when perfected is to say that blackness is flawed, that whiteness is a higher state of being. It's an idea so deeply racist that it barely needs interpretation, and yet it is couched in spiritual language to deflect accountability. What struck me even more deeply was how this ideology gets internalized by African Americans who join the church. I saw with my own eyes how black members of the church accepted, rationalized, and even defended these teachings. It was heartbreaking to witness. These individuals internalized the idea that they were cursed, that they didn't deserve the priesthood, that they were spiritually inferior due to their ancestry. They accepted it as doctrine, as truth, because it had been passed down to them as such. And because they had been welcomed into a community that withheld these teachings until after their emotional loyalty had been secured, they were trapped in a cycle of spiritual self-erasure. It is an insidious form of indoctrination, one that convinces people not only to tolerate racism, but to absorb it into their identity. Yes, the church now allows African Americans to hold the priesthood. But let us not forget the timeline. This change came in 1978. Not centuries ago, not in the early days of the church, but just a few decades ago. And it didn't happen because of a sudden moral awakening. It happened under immense social and political pressure, at a time when the church's growth was being hindered by its racist doctrines, especially in Latin America and Africa. There is every reason to believe that the decision was influenced by economic and institutional concerns, not by a spontaneous revelation from heaven. And when that decision was made in 1978, it caused such division among members that it led to the formation of new churches that broke away from the LDS Church. One of them is called the Restored Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. They kept the old doctrines, including the ban on black priesthood holders. They considered the 1978 revelation to be false. That alone should tell you how deeply racism was embedded in the spiritual DNA of the church. To many, the idea of black people receiving the priesthood was so unacceptable that it constituted apostasy. It is also essential to remember that the LDS Church didn't just quietly carry these beliefs in a time of ignorance. Even after slavery was abolished in the United States, even during the height of the civil rights movement, the church clung to its racist doctrines with unwavering conviction. It fought tooth and nail to defend those ancient beliefs, reinforcing them with theological justifications, prophetic statements, and policy decisions. While other churches were confronting their histories and attempting to change, the LDS Church was solidifying its exclusionary theology. Today, the church tries to portray itself as inclusive. African Americans are given the priesthood. Interracial marriages are no longer officially condemned. On the surface, progress seems to have been made. But underneath that surface, the old doctrines still linger. In certain congregations, particularly outside the United States, black members are still told, sometimes indirectly, sometimes explicitly, that the color of their skin is a curse inherited from their ancestors. They are told that their blackness has a spiritual explanation, a divine cause, and that it marks them as different from other members of the faith. And then there is the matter of resurrection. Even today, I have encountered people who believe, as doctrine, that when black individuals are resurrected, they will no longer be black. That's how they phrase it, no longer black. Not healed, not renewed, not restored, just not black. That phrasing alone carries the weight of centuries of racial prejudice disguised as divine truth. To be resurrected in perfection in their theology is to be white. This is not just a theological quirk, it is a racial hierarchy encoded into the afterlife. Racism in the church doesn't only come from policy. It is cultural, doctrinal, structural, and psychological. It isn't just what is said in manuals or from the pulpit, it's in the way people speak, in the stories they share, in the assumptions they make, in the theological frameworks they use to explain suffering, lineage, and belonging. It is a racism so deeply embedded that even when policies change, the core beliefs remain intact. The most painful part and the most damaging is when those affected by these doctrines internalize them. When African American members of the church come to believe they were cursed, that their ancestors were cursed, that their priesthood was denied for a righteous reason, and that their very bodies are spiritually flawed, that is internalized racism at its most devastating. It is not just accepting the church's authority, it is accepting that your place in it is inherently inferior and that any advancement you are granted is not a right, but a gift from a benevolent majority. Even as the church attempts to modernize its image, it still refuses to explicitly denounce the racist teachings of its past. It has never issued a formal apology for the priesthood ban. It has never declared the teachings about the curse of Cain or the idea of skin color as divine punishment to be false. Instead, it relegates those ideas to the category of past understandings or opinions of former leaders without addressing the fact that those teachings were treated as divine truth for over a century. This is not just a problem of history. It is a problem of continuity, of silence, of moral evasion. The church cannot claim to be a vessel of eternal truth and then disown its foundational teachings when they become inconvenient. It cannot ask converts to dedicate their lives while hiding from them the truths that might challenge their commitment. It cannot remain silent about doctrines that continue to hurt and marginalize its members even after the official policies have changed. I entered the church with faith and hope. I believed in the possibility of spiritual transformation and belonging. But what I found, eventually, was a carefully managed narrative, one that delayed the hard truths, one that counted on my emotional investment to override my moral objections. I was not told about the curse of black skin until it was too late to walk away easily. I was not told that resurrection would whiten me until I had already been conditioned to see that as a blessing rather than an insult. I was not told that some people believed the President of the United States was inspired by God because of his alignment with racist or exclusionary ideologies until I was surrounded by voices that treated such beliefs as divine insight. It is incredible how far internalized racism can go, especially when it is wrapped in spiritual language and presented as eternal truth. The damage is not just doctrinal, it is personal, emotional, generational. It undermines self-worth, distorts identity, and perpetuates inequality in ways that cannot be undone simply by changing a policy or issuing a vague statement. What is needed is accountability, transparency, and a full rejection of the ideologies that did so much harm. Anything less is not repentance, it is public relations. What I have described is not a secret. It is well documented, deeply embedded, and continues to affect people today. The question is not whether the church will change, but whether it will ever tell the truth. Because until it does, no amount of surface inclusion can undo the foundation built on exclusion. And no resurrection, literal or symbolic, will be enough to wash away a theology that equates blackness with imperfection.